This report is presented to you on the operations of the company by the board, and welcome Alfred, appointed a few minutes ago, and management. And I would just like to point out, I mean, you obviously know Keith, and you might not know a lot of stuff about him. In fact, he's the biggest producer of sapphires in the world out of an operation in Montana. Donna and Anna look after the finances of the company. Carolyn and Paul are the team effectively that gets the press releases out to you, does all the video work, all the social media. Paul is our chief drone pilot as well. Claudia is the admin manager in Ecuador. John Paul, the VPX, very experienced in exploration in jungle terrains. Carolina Diaz, on the legal side, manages everything from dealing with the financing that's going on at the moment to negotiating with informal miners in the field. This is quite a deep management group, and not all of these guys are working full-time for runners. So there isn't a huge management bill. These are all people that we can call on, and they will dedicate whatever time is necessary to the company. I've left out Monica Ospina. Monica and Fabiano standing at the back lead up our CSR group. And these guys are charged with getting the story of exploration and mining across to a group of people that's been marginalized for 400 years. They are still living in exactly the same way, effectively, that they were living when the Spanish was there. The Spanish were there for 400 years ago. And these guys are leading the charge. They are always going in ahead and preparing the communities for what to expect when the exploration team arrives behind them. They are doing an incredible amount of work very successfully, and it is thanks to this group that our exploration teams can get into this area. Management's exploration experience in the specific area is pretty deep as well. In the contiguous belt that's contiguous to the current concession block, management has been responsible for the discovery of 2/3 of the 43-101 resources in gold and 3/4 of the copper resources. The gold resources are about 26 million ounces. The copper resources are about 30 billion pounds. Having spoken a little bit about the people, I just wanted to talk about the jurisdiction a little bit. Ecuador has become a hotspot of exploration thanks to the exploration success of a couple of juniors. These are guys that have gone in with venture capital money and have come up with exploration discoveries that are truly world-class. And the symbiotic relationship between the juniors and the major companies are now coming in to take those discoveries, finance them, and develop them into mines. The list of majors operating in Ecuador is pretty significant. There have been a number of changes in the cabinet in Ecuador over the last months and couple of weeks, and these are the ministries with which any exploration or development company needs to have a relationship. Obviously, the Ministry of Non-Renewable Resources is an absolutely key one. That's one where there's been significant change, where mining is now reporting to that minister along with electricity and oil and gas. He is basically a super minister. Keith and I will be meeting Minister Perez on Friday. He is an extremely powerful minister within the cabinet. The other people that I just want to talk about while we're on this slide is the Minister of Foreign Trade, a guy by the name of Campana, who is from the private sector. He's an economist, played Davis Cup tennis for Ecuador, And this is a guy who has been charged by the president to identify the parts of the economy that will have most leverage. In other words, if the government stimulates those parts of the economy, which ones will generate most revenue and employment? He's identified 7 areas of the economy, and mining is obviously a crucial component of that. So he is the guy who is out there talking about the construction of a copper smelter in Ecuador. Not the mining person, the Minister of Foreign Trade. Very close to the president, a personal friend of the president, and is, we hear, going to go places in Ecuador. He's not a politician, he's from the private sector, and on the same sort of concept, the president just 2 weeks ago appointed a new Minister of Finance and the Economy. He is from the private sector, a young guy. And so the 3 of them are the sort of super ministers within the cabinet that need to really stimulate the economy in Ecuador. So change, and change is always a little bit scary, but this is very positive change. What we've done over the last year or so, as Keith mentioned, the project is massive. It's 2,000 square kilometers. It is virgin. This is an area that has never been explored systematically for minerals before. And it lies along trend, and the geology is shown in blue and purple. It lies along trend of a mineral belt that has an enormous mineral endowment, both in gold and in copper. So far, we've only covered about 15% of that concession area with the stream sediment sampling that Keith was talking about, and that's just to identify from the streams which streams are draining areas of metal enrichment. And the other thing that we've done is the geophysics that Keith talked about. We've done that over the whole area, and that program was finished in November last year. But the key takeaway is that this area has never been explored before for minerals.
Is number 7 Nambiha the same Nambiha that Keith was referring to?
Correct.
Okay.
And our exploration approach can basically be seen as consisting of 3 components. The reconnaissance is the young, strong, dynamic Ecuadorians, our Rambo group, if you like. These are the guys that are fighting their way through the jungle, getting up to streams and taking those initial samples under extremely tough conditions. And they are identifying the streams that are enriched in metals and then combining that with the geophysical data and identifying the targets. Then the targets go to a group of grayer-haired individuals with more experience, and they're developed into drill targets. So far, having covered only 15% of the area on the ground, we've got 7 epithermal targets, which are gold targets, and there's one cluster of geophysical targets that look like porphyries. There's 13 of them in that area. So if one does the math and extrapolates into completing the rest of the concession area, obviously we're going to have multiple targets. And the idea is that more experienced group refines the targets into targets that we can actually get drill rig into and test them. So you'll notice the scale on the left is a couple of kilometers, and on the right we're talking about hundreds of meters. They're bringing down the size of the target to something that we can effectively drill. And so our plan is to do scout drilling on a whole bunch of these targets. The first one in that lineup is called Crunchy Hill, and we plan to have a whole number of targets ready for scout drilling after we've drilled Crunchy Hill. So that basically, once the drill rig comes into the project, it doesn't leave, it moves from one target to the next, so that we can then prioritize which are the targets that are suitable for us as a company to advance, which ones should we start thinking about joint venturing or possibly spinning out into another company. In terms of what we've done, Keith mentioned these sinters and the geysers, and I just want to spend a minute on this because what happens around geysers and these steaming hot pools is that you get a layer of silica developed, and that's a very resistant thing that's resistant to erosion. And in our project area, in the La Torre target district, we're seeing vestiges of these silica platforms where the steaming hot pools were and where the geysers were, like that's going on currently in Yellowstone National Park. And on the left-hand side, that steaming pool is from New Zealand. It's a little bit unusual. In fact, it's very unusual in that along with the arsenic and the antimony, which is the orange stuff, there's also gold and silver precipitating in that. That is very, very unusual. Normally, you do not have gold and silver at that level. Normally, what's happening is that you have these geysers that are erupting, and the gold and silver is actually precipitating a couple of hundred meters below that. And it's actually the explosion of the geyser that causes the gold to precipitate and is very effective at precipitating the gold. So that collects in one specific area. It's slightly less effective at stripping the gold out of that, the silver out of that solution. So the gold will extend a little bit closer to surface, and the arsenic and antimony and mercury are traveling as gases, so they'll come all the way to surface. And the reason that I'm talking about that is that in an idealized slice across one of these sinter terraces or one of these silica bars, and these at the top are rock textures from our La Torre target. Right at the edge of you can use those textures to identify where you are within that silica platform. So if you're seeing plant remains and reed stems that have silica encrusted around them, you're right at the very cool edge of that where you're right at the marsh, where the silica is just encrusting the streams, but the fluids are cool enough that the plants can grow there. And as you move towards the throat or the central part of the system, where you want to be, because the gold is going to be precipitating beneath where that geyser is erupting, so the textures of the rock change. So in other words, we can take these samples that come from the field and recognize which part of the sinter we were from, and we can vector towards the hot active part where we think that the gold and silver would have been precipitated. And just talking about the La Torre district, I've talked about that a little bit up till now. Those yellow patches, and there are 4 of them on that area of about 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers, those are where we're seeing 4 distinct silica platforms that were formed 150 million years ago, and we're still seeing vestiges of them. In addition to that, obviously we're using the chemistry of the streams, and in this case, the size of the bubble is proportional to the amount of arsenic, and this is naturally occurring arsenic that's showing up in those streams. So we're using the combination between the arsenic, antimony, and mercury in the streams, along with where these old silica platforms were, and our vectors within those platforms to be able to vector into where those targets are and where we need to drill underneath. So if you were to ask one of our exploration geologists to drill what he conceptualizes as our target, and that's always best done after a couple of beers so that he's telling the truth, this is the kind of picture that he would draw. We're seeing the sinter terraces, or the vestiges of the sinter terraces in the pale blue at the top there, and so that's the surface that there was 150 million years ago. And within that sinter surface, or within that sinter terrace, we can vector towards where the geysers were, and below those geysers, where the veins are going to be. And we know that in most situations, there is going to be no gold and silver at surface, but there will be arsenic, there will be antimony, and there will be mercury. And that's what we're finding in the field. And so one of our drill targets would be, and Croce Hill is an example of this, to drill one of those steeply inclined target areas. However, there's a second target that's crucially important. In this area, the rocks are layered and they sort of they're more or less horizontal. And in most epithermal systems, as that geyser is blowing and the pressure of that rock is being released, it will fracture a specific, there are layers of rock that are fractured more easily or are more permeable. And in those more permeable layers, you get a blowout of the mineralization. And very often, and it's labeled as the red there, those are the really crucial deposits. The veins are important deposits, but it's those blowouts that might be completely blind, and they're certainly blind in what we think is going on in our area. That is the second target, but it is the more important target in that area. So all of our exploration is doing this sort of sleuth work to identify where those targets are likely to be, and then we can try geophysics and that kind of thing to identify exactly where those targets are for drilling. So our planning is obviously to push forward with the Rambo groups that are out in the front, that are defining the targets and bringing it back for eventually scout drilling. We're being a little bit slow on that. We're training local staff to increase the speed that we're going on that work. We're doing the detailed work, and basically we're lining up a bunch of targets that will be drilled in sequence during the scout drilling. When I talk about scout drilling, that's drilling somewhere between sort of 5 and 7 holes of maybe about 300 meters depth each. And all we plan to do with that is to identify the characteristics and the potential of that target, and then we'll move on to the next one. And I've mentioned Monica and Fabiano's work, this dialogue and instructive engagement that's going on with the communities. And I just want to give an example of that and how their team is working with some of the other ministries. That list of ministries that I gave right at the beginning as to ministries that exploration and mining touches, it's a long list. And I'm just in these three, obviously with the foundation that Keith has set up, we are talking to the education people and the health people. It's primarily that foundation is involved with education at the moment, but it's most likely, with his brother as a medical doctor on the board, it's most likely to move across into health at some stage. But what I wanted to touch on is our relationship with the agriculture department, because there is malnutrition in this area. As Keith mentioned, a lot of the game has been shot out. There are too many people to live in the sort of subsistence way that the Shuar have traditionally lived. And the agriculture department, thanks to an initiative by Monica, has said, look, we've got a whole list of crops that can grow in that area. But we have no access. We have no credibility with the people. And we have access because we're working with these communities all the time. And we have credibility because we pay them and we treat them well. And so linking together this know-how of the agricultural department with our access and our relationship with the local communities allows us to start getting these communities to understand that there are crops that will grow in the jungle that will do away with malnutrition and a whole bunch of other things that are going on there. And the one that I just wanted to highlight is this Sachaintia vine. It is indigenous to that area. It's known throughout that part of the Amazon, but the local people don't recognize that it's a superfood. This thing grows as a weed. It has got a 27% protein value, which is higher than a peanut. It has extreme levels of omega-3s and 6s. Extreme. It is a superfood. It has a shelf life of 2 years. It grows there. These guys can produce it and do away with malnutrition. And the agriculture department has got 14 other crops that are not quite as dramatic as this one. But it really is an opportunity to fundamentally change the lives of those people, not by bringing anything foreign in, by them just doing a little bit of farming, of stuff that they actually know about. They could walk into the forest and identify this. And so 2 weeks ago was our first meeting where Monica and Fabiano's group organized the access for the agriculture department for the first time ever to set foot in that area and organize a 1 hectare area where they will start teaching the local people how to grow these various crops and how to rotate them and all that. We are in an incredibly privileged position to change this area, irrespective of whether our exploration is going to be successful or not, to change this area forever, and our exploration will be successful. So in summary, we've got a bunch of people that have a good track record, and the management team is just a fantastic bunch of people. It's a real privilege to work with them. The insiders have a huge amount of skin in the game. The jurisdiction, some changes, but they're positive changes, and they're all economically driven. How can Ecuador get out of its current situation? We've identified multiple targets as we expected. When we went into the area, we thought that there would be multiple targets. I don't think we ever thought that there would be quite as many, but anyway, it's a good problem to have. And thanks to the CSR group, the relationship, and in fact it's not only CSR, it is the respect with which the exploration group and everyone in the company deals with the local communities. And thanks to that, we have unparalleled access. This area has never been explored together before, and we basically have carte blanche. And we plan to be drilling the scout drilling in Q4. And the plan of that scout drilling, and this is where we need some discipline, is not to be distracted, not to listen to the analysts, not to listen to the bankers who are going to be trying to force us to move our first target into resource drilling, but to keep drilling these various targets just so that we know how important that target is, and from that we will know which targets are apt for us to continue to develop towards a resource, which ones are going to be too big, too expensive, and we need to do a joint venture with Anglo American or whoever it is, and which ones could possibly be spun out into a separate company or whatever. The aim being to increase the shareholder value from this project. That's it. Thanks very much.